fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCOO 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
You are back in the House of Mystery. And, of course, I'm Al Warren, Mr. David Baseball Martino.
I'm going to be the baseball guy from now on.
Well, I can't help it. I can't help it. Just, I mean, the karate lessons there aren't really helping, but.
No?
Well, I can't even look at them. Come on. It scares me. You're scaring everybody away. Everyone's getting scared of you.
I know. Getting kicked off of TikTok and all sorts of stuff.
Well, yeah, you're brutal. You're violent.
Yeah.
Pressing
being reported.
Yeah, well, that's me. Sorry.
You know what they say about snitches, Al?
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm 860, so it doesn't matter now.
Yeah,
it's downhill now. Just remember, if you're going to take me out, take me out. I don't want to just be wounded. One leg and one arm. I want to be gone. None of this messing around stuff. Anyway.
Quietly and quickly.
Yeah. So now we have a guy. He's never been on the show before, and probably after this he won't be again. But and now he's done some great writing, and he's got a new book out that I find is very important. I think it's got a really good theme to it. It's something interesting. And top this off, Arnold Schwarzenegger recommends the book.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's probably because he slept with him or paid him. Anyway. Oh boy, you can tell it's Friday for me. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the book called Animals. And the writer is Will Staples. Welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here.
Oh, you're still here. Great.
We didn't scare him away.
No, I tend to do that at times. Yeah. So, well, that must be really just a boom of a great thing to have someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger come out and say he really recommends the book.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. I hadn't written a book before, so I went into it wondering how much mud I'd get in my face trying to dip my toe in that water. And then once I finished it, sent it out to Jane Goodall and to Arnold Schwarzenegger's people. And, both of them, responded very positively and ended up blurbing the book. And so, the Venn diagram of books that are recommended by the two of them is probably pretty limited, but, it was exciting.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good thing. I mean, because in essence, when you write, you kind of hope people, remember it or care about it, you know what I mean? And think about it and actually have an opinion. I think that's great, personally. But, because a lot of people have a lot of opinions about my books. So and that keeps me going. So, now you've got quite the history. Like you must have been, when you say dip your foot in the water, but you've got a lot of writing history because that's, you worked on Mission Impossible franchise. You've done Without Remorse and Jack Ryan, Shooter. So you've got a lot of writing history.
Yeah. I mean, I've been writing professionally in Hollywood for, 19 years now. So, came to Hollywood initially to work on movies and then started writing some video games on the side, like some Call of Duty video games and things like that. And then, more recently is sort of what types of things are being made in television versus film. A lot of the stuff that I was really excited about in film is now being made in television. So I'm doing a lot more TV these days. And, for better and for worse, all the stuff that gets produced is the shoot 'em up action stuff. About half of the things I do are, stories about issues and historical fiction and dramas and things like that.
So when you went to this book, this is your first book, and now you're up against all these writers who are writers are terrible human beings too. I see them, know them, work with them, and so what was it that made you or give you that push to actually write this book?
Yeah, so I love doing deep dives into cutting edge issues, subcultures that sort of speak to what's going on in the world right now. And so I had been approached by Leonardo DiCaprio's company about doing a film about animal trafficking. And of course you say yes. And then once I was hired, I realized that almost nothing is known about animal trafficking because there's no law enforcement dollars put towards investigating it. So, you look at like the 4 biggest illicit markets in the world and you have like drugs, guns, and human trafficking, and then animal trafficking. But one of those isn't a law enforcement priority. So we don't know anything beyond the fact that, we see photographs of elephants being killed in Africa, and then we see ivory ending up in markets in Asia. But beyond that, it's like if all we knew about the cocaine trade was that coke is being grown in Bolivia and ends up in LA, like you'd be missing the whole story. And so I went and did a ton of firsthand research that I could spend hours talking about that, but a ton of research and learned so much about the issue. And then as often happens with Hollywood movies, it sort of got put in suspended animation, waiting for actor schedules to line up, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, nobody knows what's going on with this stuff. It's really important to me. The issue touched me very deeply. And I was like, I want to get this information out there. So I decided to repackage it as a novel. And, all of the producers on the project were supportive of that. And then just to make it clear that this wasn't some way to sort of do a side hustle or profit off suffering animals, I donated all the money from the book to wildlife charities, and hopefully it spreads some awareness about the issue because, right now all the major traffickers are operating with total impunity.
Wow. Well, how dangerous was that research? Did you need a security team to go out and look into this type of trafficking?
Arnold.
That would have been that probably would have been a great idea now that you suggest it. So I went to, at first I did a bunch of phone interviews and things like that with people just to sort of learn as much as I could without doing field research. And then I went to 7 different countries throughout Africa and Asia. And it got really hairy in a few different places. I would say there actually 4 of the countries all had pretty sketchy situations. Like we were deep in poaching villages in Mozambique, where it's just the only economy is poaching. And if you show up, you want to you don't want people to know what you're there to investigate. Right. And then in the Golden Triangle region of Asia, so you're talking areas of Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam is where all the major traffickers operate. And they operate in these geopolitical black holes that nobody goes to. And so I was with an environmentalist who had spent years developing a network of fixers in those areas to do undercover, hidden camera footage and stuff like that. So he and I went together. We went to a warlord controlled region of Myanmar. We had to surrender our passports to the security forces to go into this city that, as far as the international community is concerned, doesn't exist. But you go there and you have 100,000 people where there's prostitution and drugs and gambling and every endangered animal you can think of on the menu. Similarly, there's a spot in Laos like that, and Hanoi. I think what was shocking to me was how just some idiot from Hollywood, I was able to end up deep behind the lines in all these places that nobody is choosing to go. And that was sort of the unsettling thing. It was like, wait, so how can I get here but nobody else is going here? So that was really, so in the book, I make references to these various locations and cartels in the fictional story. And it's all the real cartels and the real locations. And anybody who reads the book could just go there tomorrow if they have a certain risk appetite. Yeah,
you better not give out your address.
For better or for worse, these places are so insulated that when you go there, it's like for example, in Mong La in Special Region 4 in Myanmar, the idea of somebody who looks like me even showing up, they hadn't seen somebody like me in years. So it's it doesn't cross their mind why I would even be there. It's sort of like if you showed up in North Korea, there's no sense of why outsiders would be even coming and interacting with you in certain ways. And I had a cover story for every environment I was in. That wasn't bulletproof, but it was enough to, to stay out of trouble most of the time. At one point I did get detained for about a day and had to talk my way out of that one. And so that was sketchy, but I got the mugshot out of it. And that was, there's some upside.
Yeah. Well, long as it wasn't too deep and hard of a search.
There was a lot of verbal back and forth. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, okay. Well, it would be good to talk about the details. When I was writing a book years back for a publisher called In Chains, and it was about the same sort of thing, but we didn't really cover animals. We were talking about human trafficking and how involved the U.S. really was in it, and how people were really surprised by that. And a lot of the stories I covered were pretty terrifying for body parts and stuff. And but when you went through this, and you say that nobody's really, that you could get in and nobody else is doing it, and it seemed to be no problem for the most part finding these places and seeing what's going on. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that nobody is doing it, or does nobody care, or what is it?
My opinion is that there are geopolitically greater things at stake than the welfare of the natural world. So when you're looking at places like Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, China's obviously making huge inroads in those countries. The U.S. has very significant trade interests and things like that. And so for us to use our leverage to do things like protect, to stop bear bile farming and things like that, I just think it falls off the radar as a priority, which is too bad. And I think if people were aware of how bad it was and the scope of the devastation of the natural world happening over there, I think we'd probably put more pressure on politicians to make that a priority. I mean, it was really staggering, a lot of the stuff I came across. And the reality is, there are countries that are pretty high on the corruption index where local government officials are in on the trade. And, if people try and make a stink about it, it pretty much gets shut down pretty quick.
It's kind of crazy. What, I guess let's not get too detailed, but what were some of the things you learned that maybe surprised you? Maybe some of the things that you didn't expect to learn about trafficking and the use of animals in your research?
Well, yeah, I mean, the use of animals. So a couple things were really startling. So I think one narrative that emerges, especially in sort of left-leaning political views in America, is that this is about a cultural difference, right? That in certain cultures they believe that certain animal parts have spiritual powers, and who are we to judge that? I mean, the reality is this stuff's been banned from traditional Chinese medicine for years, and this is all being run by cartels who are trying to profit off of superstition. And they're, like in Vietnam, for example, they have people who will lurk in the cancer wards and try and convince people to not get modern cures for cancer for their kids, but instead sell them rhino horn. So the cartel is selling rhino horn and false hope, when all they're giving these family is just, keratin that they're charging $60 a gram for. It's the same price as cocaine or gold. And so, I thought that was really depressing. And a lot of the people who are buying it also are buying these things as status symbols now. When you go to Horn Village in Vietnam, it's mostly rhino horn jewelry, elephant ivory jewelry, and things like that for sale. Or if you go to the King's Roman Casino in Laos, you can get a tiger banquet or tiger wine or tiger penis wine, whatever. And they sort of pay lip service to the fact that it'll make you more virile and whatever. But the reality is it's people going and buying exclusivity. Just instead of a Rolex or a bottle of fancy champagne, they're buying, a tiger. And so I thought, the idea that this was really just about greed and organized crime and not about cultural differences, I found shocking. And then the other aspect of it that I found shocking was how once you get to these locations like King's Roman Casino in Laos, Mong La in Myanmar, Horn Village in Vietnam, this stuff is not hidden. It's like, it's all out in the open. It's all out on the table, along with all manner of other illicit things, because these are cartels that are in the distribution business. And if you're distributing animal parts, you're probably using those same networks to distribute all sorts of other illicit stuff. And if you can get in there, none of it's hidden.
So how do you know it was the same price as cocaine?
Oh, so just in the research when we buy the yeah, exactly.
Almost.
From what I hear.
From what I hear. Well,
hang on Hollywood long enough, you hear a few stories.
Yeah. Tiger penis wine. So isn't that just urine?
No, it's it's a bottle of wine with a giant tiger penis floating in it. So yeah, I mean, so you'd go to these restaurants, and the centerpiece of these restaurants would be a giant fish tank full of rice wine, and floating in the rice wine would be a tiger carcass that had been in there, for a couple of years and was in some, state of decomposition. And then there'd be a spigot on the end, and you'd be given a glass, and you go and you take a glass of wine off the end of this sort of, this brown slurry, and then everybody drinks it. I mean, the only thing it's got going for it is that the hooch is such high, alcohol content that there's probably nothing alive in there anymore.
Oh, that's awful.
That's crazy. Well, what did you learn about how these animals are smuggled out of their native countries?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that they're being sourced. So obviously, like, when you talk about rhino parts, that's, down in Africa, it's all about corruption, right? It's like there's, it's such big business. A rhino horn can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so those, there's a whole Belt and Road Initiative in China where there, if you go to Africa now, it's like there's Chinese people everywhere doing all manner of, business development things. And so you have a whole network there, and those people are now creating a pipeline to start moving product north into that Southeast Asia and East Asia. And then a lot of it, though, the new thing that nobody's really talking about is the scope of endangered animal farming that's going on. So there are secret tiger farms all throughout Southeast Asia right now. And there's, obviously, there's movement to have rhino horn or rhino farming. But yeah, so it's sort of some stuff's being farmed and some stuff's being smuggled out. But a lot of it has to do with just all of the, the Chinese expansion into these developing regions, creating these distribution networks.
How many Americans are involved in the buying of this, or is this sort of thing going on within just their own countries over there?
This is an over there issue. There are other faces to wildlife trafficking and the exploitation of animals. Obviously, the stories about Doc Antle and the Tiger King stuff, there's a lot of that stuff breaking down. I mean, any exotic wildlife trade happening in the United States is inherently sketchy and probably illegal. There's a lot of bad stuff around horses and things. The reality is endangered animals are like fine art. Like, all private zoos and collectors want them, but it's really hard to establish provenance. So things sort of just get moved around a lot of times with fake papers and things like that. But when you're talking about rhino, tiger, elephant, that's, all the sort of Africa, Asia nexus. And I think what people don't really think about is, like, most of these animals, with the exception of tigers, are African animals, and most of the consumers are East Asian consumers. And it doesn't occur to people that, folks in East Asia and folks in Africa are thousands of miles and a significant cultural difference apart. And so how are those two cultures connected, and how is that distribution happening? And that's where you have the animal equivalent of, the Zetas cartel and things like that operating in the Golden Triangle to connect those two cultures.
So now in the story you have in here is primarily a fictional story, right? Or you've taken characters, ideas, locations from what you've come across, but it's all fictional, correct?
It is the same way a movie like Traffic is fictional or Contagion is fictional, but I would say that in the case of this book, the location, there are a lot more real locations. I guess my thought was, if I wrote a nonfiction book about the experiences I had and the things I saw, a bunch of animal activists, and pro-animal people would buy the book and be like, yeah, we should care about animals, whereas I figured if I wrote a thriller set in the world of global wildlife trafficking, where you invest in the characters and get exposed to what's really going on, that, it might force people to, learn a little bit about what's going on they may not know. And the book is not preachy about what you should take away from it. It's saying, here's what's really going on. This is something that we should all care about for different reasons, and how you act on that information is up to you. I've had people who are vegans who really love the book, and I have had people who are hunters who really love the book, which has been interesting to see. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's a story about human characters traversing this very corrosive, dark underworld of animal trafficking. And it really, that's the other thing, is it really, everybody I've interacted with in that world is really impacted by it in a deeply negative way. And so, I mean, it made for fascinating characters to write about.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd imagine it would. So I think now Randall Knight is one of your main characters. So how do you create a character then? Like, where do you get that from in your mind?
Yeah, so that there's a little piece of myself in all of the characters, I would say. So for the Randall Knight character, something that I have been fascinated by is how none of us think that we're the problem, yet we all make choices that impact the animal world negatively. And so, for Randall Knight, I wanted the idea of this sort of unsentimental wheeler dealer who's involved in the animal industry, but that doesn't think that he's a part of the problem, who over the course of the story, increasingly there's this nagging realization that he is a part of this problem and that, he is part of the exploitation of the natural world. So, there's an element of like Rick from Casablanca in him. He's a guy who, at the beginning of the story, doesn't stick his neck out for nobody. And, I also felt like, originally the genesis of this project was writing a story for 3 movie stars. And I knew that they were all stars that gravitated towards really complex roles. And so the Randall Knight character was originally developed for Leonardo DiCaprio, and looking for a muscular role for him that would be complex and interesting. So that was sort of where it came from.
Well, if he's not available, you could always use me.
Yeah. Well, how do you experience Randall? Do you have an inner monologue in your head? Can you hear him? Is that kind of how you create your dialogue, or is this more of a visual thing for you since you've worked in film and TV?
Both. I mean, music is very important for me. And so, I'll develop a soundtrack for each project, for each character, to help me immediately put myself in that headspace. For Randall, there are choices that I make in my own life that I can't fully justify, vis-a-vis animals and animal exploitation. And you sort of try and put those thoughts away. And I think for Randall, I really wanted to start sort of, picking at that and seeing where it went. So he was a really fun character to write. He's a he's a real, he can be a bit of a jerk, Randall, for those of you reading the book. And he's somebody who, he sort of is who believes strongly in capitalism as the solution to all problems. And believes that when you fight the iron hand of economics, it's pointless. And I think we all sort of can look at things like global warming, destruction of the natural world, and things like that, and we say, yeah, it's bad, but what am I going to do? Am I really going to buy a different car or, make these other choices? And at the end of the day, most of us go on living our life, trundling towards the end of the natural world and trundling towards, this crazy climate change that we're experiencing without really making any meaningful choices to stop it. I just find that fascinating about human psychology. And so Randall was really me trying to externalize that in a character who is aware of these things and also aware of how pointless it is to fight them.
I think we, as humans, we fight change because change brings age and then we die. And
we also know that, it's say I, make a certain choice not to drive somewhere to ride my bike instead. Is that really going to change the course of global warming? And so we all sort of default to that. What difference am I going to make? And so really, if there's a theme to the book, it's that we all have to draw a line or the line gets drawn for us. And if we can draw that line wherever we want, but to pretend that we're not drawing a line for ourselves is foolish. And then my goal with it is, if you are like, I'm a hunter, but I like to hunt sustainably, then, that's your choice. And, if you can live with it, then good for you. And if you think, I can't be complicit in the destruction of animals and I want to be a vegan and wear plant-based shoes and things like that, then that's where your line is. And so that was sort of where Randall's character, how he sort of lived at the center of the story.
Yeah, and of course we've all seen those pictures of different, sometimes celebrities and sometimes, like Trump Jr. or somebody out there that have gone and shot some wild game or some animal in Africa somewhere just for the sport of it and stuff. Do you kind of cover that in this sort of thing?
Yeah,
kind of behavior?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a whole section because I did want to traverse that aspect of the issue because it is important. There are certain animals that it's really hard to make them commercially viable. You know, like if you're talking about forest elephants in certain parts of the world, they're terrible for tourism. So if you open a hunting concession, you can protect the forest elephants, but on the other hand, you're protecting them so that you can kill them and manage a population. And so I think there is a question of what I think, and it's really just like a moral question of whether it's better to preserve animals so that we can kill them for our own pleasure, or whether it's better to let them die off. Obviously, in a perfect world, we would preserve them for the sake of preserving them and because it's important to protect ecosystems and habitats. But that's not the world we live in. And I think that was one of the things I wanted to explore with the book is like, let's look at these ugly truths that we have these moral judgments to make and make your own judgment. The book's not telling you which way to go with it. I mean, there were some and then there's some unambiguously disgusting things. Like I went to a hunting concession, and I mentioned this in the book as a fictional event, but it really happened. Went to a hunting concession in Mozambique where it was basically shut down for the year. And it turned out a Russian billionaire had showed up a month before and asked the hunting concession, what is your quota for all the different animals you're allowed to kill on this hunting concession? And they showed it to him and he said, I want to stay here until I've killed everything. And so the guy stayed at the hunting concession until he wiped out every animal the concession was allowed to kill that year and then went home. And, you know, one of the animals was apparently a lion that they were not able to find because there just wasn't a lion on the property, yet that concession was allowed to kill a lion that year. And so according to one of the people we spoke to there, eventually a donkey was tied to a tree and a hole was cut in a fence, and a lion crawled through that fence from a neighboring park to go eat the donkey, and then it was killed by the billionaire. And so things like that, obviously, I found disturbing. Yet at the same time, on that land where the hunting concession was, prior to the concession coming in, there was nothing but red dust because everything had been killed there years before. So I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, we basically create these environments for wealthy people to execute these animals. But there were no animals there before.
Well, you don't have to tell us which Russian it is, but is it a guy that rides a horse with no shirt on?
I didn't get more details on that. It was a very quiet conversation. You know, and also it's a bit of like, there's a bit of a wilderness of mirrors when you get into that world where it's like, you never know who's telling you the truth about what. Like, you know, in South Africa, when I was investigating poaching in Kruger, I definitely talked to several different people, each of whom told me the other person was a complete liar. So on the one hand, that's frustrating as a researcher. On the other hand, it's really fascinating that you're in this area where you have no idea who's telling the truth.
Yeah. It's like Washington. So, how do you decide with all of these different things going on when you're out doing the research? How do you decide which stories or which sort of events you're going to put into this story?
It was a real challenge. It was important to me that if you look at, any illicit market as having sort of three layers to it, you've got the production, which in the case of animal trafficking is the killing of the animal. You've got the distribution, and then you've got the consumption. It was important to me that we traversed all three layers. And so I tried to create a series of, so I settled because of that on having multiple perspectives and creating a braided narrative where we're starting out in different points of different places on Earth with different characters. And we can't see how these things could possibly be connected. And then very quickly they start braiding together and colliding in very explosive ways. And so each narrative was engineered to traverse a certain geography and aspect of the supply chain. And also I'm a firm believer that, audiences remember moments, not story. And so I start from a place of what are the knockout round moments that we could create with these characters? What's the most extreme way that we could smash this guy into this guy and how they could lay each other bare? And then I sort of back into what would earn that moment. How do we get there? But this one, more than anything I've ever written, involved just weeks of note carding and trying to solve the puzzle of like, how does this guy get from here to here? And if he's there at this point, how's that guy get there? And And eventually it all just sort of clicked into place. And that was a really exciting moment. And once I had that, I was like, I've got to get the story out one way or another. And that was why when the idea of writing this as a book presented itself, I just had to do it.
How long did it take you to do all of this? Like to go to all these places and see people and then put it down on paper and kind of go through it? It must have been a while.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just a firm believer in like, what's the point of writing any of this stuff if you're not telling the truth, and you only have the truth if you have the facts. And so, I did the interviews for a few weeks, and then I did 30 days in the field. It was a real whirlwind bouncing around the 7 countries over that 30 days. And then wrote the movie script, and there was a long sort of period of waiting to see when that would happen. And then once I committed to writing the book, I tend to write from a place of fear, but also the idea that all writing is rewriting. So I wrote the first draft very quickly of the book really quickly, and then spent a ton of time rewriting it, getting notes from friends and things. And then, but it all came together pretty quickly. I mean, I knew that I had a gap in my movie schedule to write it. And so I probably wrote the whole book in about 10 weeks and then worked with an editor once I sold it to a publisher.
How do you feel now that you've done it? I mean, did this sort of process make you feel like more hopeful, or did it make you feel more depressed?
Made me feel more hopeful about my writing and more depressed about the world.
Oh.
I mean,
Wow.
It was a great process. I loved writing the book. So often you do things in Hollywood and there's such a huge disconnect between what you put on the page and what ends up on the screen. Or, about half the stuff I do, I'm being brought in to fix things that are broken. And you can only, I'll come in on a movie for 3 weeks and you try and fix as much as you can, but the end product is still not going to be, it's not going to be an A+, it might be B+. And so, it was great to work on something where the words on the page are the words that people are experiencing, and people seem to have responded very positively to that. I think the sense of futility I feel about this issue has not been diminished by the experience of releasing this book. It's just an issue that nothing has really changed since I initially did the research. You could still go to the same places and see the same things. Yes, it's a really rough issue, this one.
Was it a big transition going from screenwriting to prose novels?
It was a huge transition. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of because so much of screenwriting is designing the blueprint for the building, and this one you're doing all the interior decorating too. And so I think in screenwriting, you might reuse the same verb twice on the same page, and you're like, is that the best word? But the point is the character's running. And, with this, I really felt pretty exposed in terms of, with each sentence I was writing, like, people are going to read this and are they going to be moved by this? Will they think this is artful or not artful? And so there's definitely a lot more agony that went into each sentence. I think the other thing that was funny is movies, when you write movies, it's such an efficient art form because it's, 1 page per minute. So things just have to happen. It's just, an avalanche going down the mountain when you're writing a movie. And so the first draft of the book came in at like 35,000 words or something. And it was just breakneck pace. And I was like, whoa, all right, this thing's got to breathe a little bit. So then went back and was like, all right, what's missing? Where do we need to dig deeper with these characters? And then it was really fun going back in and saying, okay, like, what's something else that could happen with this character? Like, where else can we push them? How far can we take them? Because we have the room to do it. And, readers have a little bit more of an attention span than moviegoers.
Not much.
It's still a pretty quick book.
Backlash. You worried about any sort of slam back for people that are thinking you're being too PC or something like that?
It's definitely not a PC book. And it's non-political and it doesn't have an agenda beyond exposing what's really going on out there. For example, when I was in Laos, I was outside this place, Botan, which is a top animal trafficking destination. Anybody could go there tomorrow and experience animal trafficking firsthand. But we heard about a bear bile farm down the road, and we went there and found a bunch of bears in crushed cages. So they were like splayed out with catheters and them being drained for bear bile. They're pinned down. They're going to spend their whole lives pinned down in these rusty cages being drained of their bile. And it was just this horrifying, shocking thing. And I was like, nobody knows this is happening here. I've got to write about this. And so, putting that down on the page, it's shocking and horrifying, but I'm not casting judgment on it as a cultural thing or this or that. I'm saying this is happening in this place, and maybe you don't care about it. Maybe you do. But it really affected me. And so, yeah, I don't worry too much about a backlash because the book is not sanctimonious or selling anything.
Yeah. Because I would have wrote it more nasty toward people doing it, but that's, bear bile. So what am I missing? Why would they want that?
Well, in Chinese culture, there's the whole theory of jinbu, which is you are what you eat. And so, that's like, hey, I'm an alcoholic. My liver's not working so good. So I'm going to get bear bile because if I have bear bile, that'll help my liver. But the other thing that's ridiculous is I would start going to these doctors that I knew were engaged in selling illicit animal parts. And if you go to a doctor in Hanoi selling illicit animal parts, he's selling, say, tiger cake, right? And you tell him that you have sexual dysfunction, tiger cake. You tell him you have a scar on your ankle from ankle surgery, tiger cake. They're in the business of selling these things. And so it's all baloney, what they're actually carrying and not carrying. They're just trying to move a very valuable product. And the book is brutal in that, these people are involved in exploiting underage girls and moving amphetamines and all sorts of stuff. And like, these are bad people trafficking these things. The same way if you're writing about, a Mexican cartel, it's like they're engaged in all sorts of murder, et cetera. So, it's pretty unvarnished in that respect.
It's disturbing. I don't know what to say. It's kind of like natural paths, but they're disturbing, but in a different way. But this is the same sort of thing, you know what I mean? But using animals, it's awful.
Yeah, and you've got a middle class in China that's now larger than the entire population of the United States, and they're looking to spend that money, and some percentage of them are looking to spend it on exclusivity and things that are illegal, to showcase their ability to get exclusive things. And so, they're going and buying rhino and tiger and all these things. And it's, it's showy having your giant rhino horn bead necklace. But at the end of the day, these animals, they're almost all gone. And so you look at an economic engine like that relative to the populations of these animals that remain and the amount of money being spent to protect them. And it's really hard to see the math working out for the animals. And so that was sort of, it was definitely like I've worked on a lot of movies and TV things. That was one where I came back and I was like, oh, I think I'm about 15 pounds lighter than when I left. And I have a really gloomy world outlook, and then eventually sort of bounced back and got back to writing shoot 'em up stuff. But, it was,
shoot those humans.
Exactly.
Make them pay for it. I mean, animals are equally humans, in my mind.
I did want to, so, at the beginning of the book, it says this is a story about animals, some of which happen to be human. I did want to make it clear that we should blur that line a little bit. And that when you look at like how, like when elephants are being wiped out in Central Africa, they shoot the baby first, they let the baby fall, and it's dying and bleeding out. And then none of the adults will leave because they have such strong family structures in elephant populations. So then once they've killed the baby, they know that they can kill every other animal in the herd because they won't leave a child behind. And so you're like, okay, how can we look at those things as being others from us when it's their own emotional connection to their family that's causing them to be wiped out?
Yeah, that's truly disturbing, I think, because I really put us on equal. It's just we might have the position of running a lot of what's going on in this world right now, but that means taking responsibility for everything else in the world. That's my point of view, and I think it's awful that they do this. But I won't get into it because I can get in trouble.
Well, no, it's tough because then you see on what follows from that is this fantasy of like, oh, we should send over some good guys with guns to go wipe out the bad guys with guns. But a lot of the, quote, bad guys with guns are like in Mozambique, for example, all the way it's structured is the syndicate leaders in Mozambique are basically rent out guns to teenage kids. And then those kids have to go kill a rhino to pay off the rental. And so a lot of those, like I was involved in the, like tagging along with rangers when we apprehended 3 kids. These kids had never been to Kruger before. They didn't know how to shoot a gun, but they had rented a gun for $250, and they knew if they didn't bag a rhino, they were never going to be able to pay it off to the local crime syndicate. And so, we ended up arresting them. They're going to jail for 12 years. And so it was like 3 kids who just like were dressed in like bright tracksuits, which are just stupid for hunting, who had never hunted anything in their lives, who live in an area with no economic opportunity. We're like, okay, our birthright is over there in Kruger. Let's go try and kill one of those because it'll pay my whole family for a year. And so do we want to go and shoot those teenage kids? Like, that's not really my fantasy. So it's really a tragedy across the board. And the only people that you can sort of unambiguously have pretty negative feelings towards are the syndicate leaders who are exploiting buyers, exploiting exploiting the customers, exploiting the animals, exploiting everyone they can for profit.
Yeah. It's just, it's terrible. But so at the end of the day, when someone picks up this book and they bring it home and they read it, what is it you want them to take away from it?
Well, first, I want them to be engaged and think this is a super high octane crime thriller, and this is an exciting read. It's got all the stuff I'm looking for in a great crime story. It's got complex characters, a dark underworld. It's got all the ingredients of an exciting story. And then realize, oh my God, everything that these characters are experiencing is rooted in reality. And ideally come out of that with some impulse to act, or at least be aware that their choices are impacting the world in various ways. And so, for me personally, there are certain organizations that I donate to now that I didn't donate to before because I feel like they're doing work that's actually making a meaningful impact. For other people, they might have a different takeaway, and I didn't really want to be prescriptive with that. But I really hope people just read it and think, this is an awesome book that was worth my time, and I learned a lot along the way. And I've got a sequel that I've mapped out but haven't written yet that will explore a different facet of the issue.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you're kind of following up with something else or kind of getting into another area. So you are kind of thinking about it.
Yeah, I've got a story. So this book was focused on the intersection of organized crime and animal exploitation. And the next book is about warlords and militias and how they intersect the animal issue in a way that has very dire consequences for the human population. The one thing I really didn't want to do was do anything that's not rooted in truth. And so, this next book, I've done another deep dive into that world. And sort of the rough pitch would be the next book is basically Unforgiven in the Congo.
Yeah. But these sort of things, when you're doing them, and I know I've done some, and it's kind of really hard to get through when you're doing the work, the research, and you're writing, and you're going through all these experiences. But at the end of it, it usually feels better when it's done. But it takes a lot out of you. Like, this must have taken a lot out of you, this book.
It crushed me. Yeah. I mean, it took a lot out of me. I tend to find that in my writing process, there's the euphoria when you first start the project and it's all potential. And then there's the horror of actually having to write it. And then there's that moment when the clouds part, when it all fits. And then you're in the rewriting process and you're like, this isn't that bad. And then you sort of click back into that really excited place. I mean, it's sort of like rock climbing or something where you get to the top and it's like, hey, now I feel great about this, but the whole way up, it felt horrible. Yeah, I mean, it was exciting to finish though. And I was excited to put it out in the world. And then there was that moment where, it came out and I was like, oh man, I hope people like it. And it seemed to find an audience, which is great.
Yeah. Now, what about there's a little touch off on disease or pandemic and stuff because, the eating of a bat is not always good. When you talk about that, do you ever think of getting into that area itself?
So funny enough, Randall Knight is an insurance investigator in the story who insures private zoo collections in the United States. And the inciting incident in his storyline is that he's called to a private zoo in Florida where there's been an outbreak of feline leukemia in the tiger population. And it's never jumped to tigers before. and this could only happen in a certain environment that he knows would be associated with illegal practices. And I worked with an epidemiologist named Matt Freeman at the University of Maryland to develop the virus. And this was back in like 2018 or something. And so the whole sort of global stakes of the story are that if Knight doesn't unravel this case, this tiger disease could jump to humans and cause a global pandemic. And then the book came out in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and it looked like I was chasing the news cycle. And Matt Freeman is now the epidemiologist who's like at front and center studying coronaviruses in real life. So it was definitely a book that was ahead of its time on that issue, but not ahead of its time when it was released.
Yeah, just crazy.
I mean,
crazy.
when you go to so one little anecdote, when we were at the King's Roman Casino in Laos, we were served tiger meat, later confirmed with DNA testing. And, I asked the chef where the tiger came from. He said, "Oh, this is a wild caught tiger." And we looked at its teeth in the freezer, and the teeth were totally shiny and clean, which means it had been eating chicken. Like a wild tiger has broken teeth. And so then we go and we're being served this tiger meat, which I'm not eating. I'm just sort of shuffling off, to later DNA test it. And I asked the waitress, where did this tiger come from? Because we knew that there was a tiger zoo across the street from the casino with like 70 tigers in it. And she goes, "Oh, these Laotian military helicopters showed up, dropped off these tigers a couple weeks ago, and the tigers just started getting smaller and smaller until they fell over and died, and that's the tiger that you're eating."
Oh, sweet.
It's like, oh. So I don't know what disease that is, but some sort of wasting disease killed this tiger, and now I'm being served it. Fantastic.
Well, yeah, the other white meat.
Oh my God. Yeah. So, I mean, you go on a bear bile farm. It's just all of these things are just so horribly disgusting and unsanitary that it's actually shocking to me that there haven't been more pandemics. But most of the pandemics that we see coming out, like these avian flus and things like that, are coming from that area of the Golden Triangle where the animal trafficking is just rampant. You have all sorts of things, living and pooping together and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Alex Jones told me it was Bill Gates.
Well, there's that. That's the third book.
Bill Gates is doing it all. That's this. It's crazy when you do stuff like this, and it must make you crazy when you see things or hear things that are totally counter to what you see when you go out and do these sort of books.
Yeah, the most maddening part to me is, because I'm involved philanthropically with some of these organizations now, is you go to these like fundraisers or there's these online campaigns, and it's just like a bunch of influencers and collectivists all showing up to be associated with the issue, but nobody's really doing anything beyond being fashionably behind the animals. Even some of the Hollywood people that are ostensibly advocating for animals are buying into false narratives about what's really going on. And so I've just been shocked at how uneducated a lot of the people are. And it just feels like it's a very fashionable issue, but not one that people actually want to tackle.
Yeah. It's too bad, So how do people find you? So how does Bill Gates get you that vaccine? Do you have a website? Do you have social media? Where do you like your fans and listeners and CIA to find you?
Well, I tend to be a firm believer that I let the writing do the talking for me and not my social media presence. So, I've got an Instagram and a Twitter that occasionally I'll put out some research stuff. Like I was just up in the Arctic Circle with Inupiaq hunters researching a new project. So, I've been posting some stuff from the Arctic on those things. But for the most part, I just love for people to read the book and experience the work. For me, it's all about the work.
I'm the same way. Don't call me. I'll call you, But do you have a website then or no?
No website. When people have contacted me, it's usually through Instagram. I have a public Instagram, which is, I post research photos and things like that. Not a lot of shirtless selfies at Havasu or anything like that.
Oh, well, that's the point. That's the only reason I'm on there. Well, I mean, we're going to have that up, your book up on the website and all that stuff, so people can, the different locations.
I'm notoriously a pretty wild research junkie, so if you go on the Instagram, you'll see some pretty fun stuff. I do a lot of stuff at the Department of Defense. So it's like I've been on a nuclear submarine on the Arctic, up at the North Pole, like done, backseated bombing runs in an F-16, stuff like that. So I like to get out there and mix it up and have some fun. And so the animal trafficking research was another one of those where I went way down the rabbit hole. But on the Instagram, there are a lot of research photos corroborating the things that we've been discussing in this conversation, and things in the book.
Yeah.
I think my mugshot might be up there, and I can put it up there.
Any nudes or anything?
No, I don't think so. Not yet, but we're gonna...
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're going to stay on it.
Anything with traffic.
Yeah. Well, that's what I do. They're not me, of course. They're others. So of course we'll have all that up. People can find the book and all that stuff like this. So how does one, I've been trying to do this for years. So how does one get to writing all these big projects and Leo DiCaprio and Schwarzenegger and all this stuff? So what do you like? What? So I should be doing this. So how does someone like me get to do this? You see, I slept my way, and all I did was get put on radio. So that doesn't work. So what's going on with this? Like, how did you get so lucky?
Well, it's like they say, like, any writing career is, hard work, talent, and luck, and you only can control one. So I'm just a workhorse. I write all day, every day. If I'm doing a project, I research like crazy. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who writes that goes deeper than me on the research. And I think that is one reason that I get a lot of work in Hollywood is, actors and directors, especially, traffic in specificity. And they want to know that if they're playing a Navy SEAL, that the writer knows a lot of Navy SEALs and has been talking to those Navy SEALs constantly when writing every single line of dialogue and things like that. It's like I'm doing this Eddie Gallagher story, adapting the New York Times reporting about Eddie's alleged murder of the detainee in Iraq. And I'm talking to all sorts of people who are involved in that case, and not involved with the case, who have, opinions about it, and maybe who have firsthand knowledge about things, et cetera. And so, for me, I love that stuff. And so I tend to get brought in when people want to know that what they're going to get is going to be real. And I think with this animal trafficking one, it was the same thing. They were like, who's the writer that's going to go where nobody else is going to go, and have absolutely no good judgment along the way about when to call it quits. So, hence getting arrested in Myanmar.
Yeah. Well, what happens when Will Staples goes missing?
Nothing.
They just find another writer, and that's it.
Yeah, it's very quiet. Nobody's coming for you. Nobody really cares. The agent's got plenty of other clients. So
now ain't that the truth, boy?
It was funny. I mean, before I went, I had a couple friends who were ex-spec ops from various like black ops units, and I had long conversations with them about different survival strategies for different situations. Developing cover stories, how to maintain a cover, things like that. They served me well along the way.
Yeah. See, and I was, neighbors with Arnold and Maria for a long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
They have a house up in the Kelowna part of the Okanagan, up in British Columbia, Canada, in their desert part, over the lake, the winery tours. And they have a house with a helicopter pad and everything. But of course, they, now that they're not together, they sold the house. But, the only thing I ever did was see someone on a helicopter. I didn't. They never spent any time talking to me. So don't.
I can see his office from my office, and I was over there like a year or two ago and got some great pictures of the Conan sword, which was probably the highlight of my professional career.
Yeah. Well, that's probably more important anyway. Well, I appreciate this. This is great. It's a great book, and we recommend people to get on board, pick up a book. It's an important read, something that you've spent a lot of time on, and, it's important. So the book is called Animals, and it's by our guest, Will Staples. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for shining a light on the book. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Will.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah.
Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.